G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and welcome to my childhood bedroom. Now I do understand the audio, little bits and pieces won't be as good. I will be heading home in a couple of days, so we'll be back in the studio. But I do hope that you're all having a fantastic day. Now today we're going to talk about the US aid. Of course we can't talk about that, some of the implications that that may have, and as well as what that means for the future of the war. And we'll look at what Speaker Johnson has said, and that then going to the floor. We will look at some strikes in the Dnipro region that Russia has confirmed with footage from the drones calling them in. Now people have asked me about the strikes against the S-400 systems, or against the airbase in Crimea. There hasn't been much more, if any, footage come out of that. There's footage of the HIMARS being launched, but as far as the battle damage assessment at the other end, we don't have very much of that. I was hoping for some satellite imagery or some drone imagery like we've got of this, so just hold out a couple of days before full confirmation on that. But we do know that there was damage down there. Now I found on my parents' fridge this photograph. Of course, me as a young fella, knowing that I would be the proud commander of Willie's PMC one day. So if you want to join the PMC, come jump onto the Telegram. Now, what I want to talk about first is, I guess, the order and the world order, so to speak, as we see it, that's, based in many countries we're familiar with on, like, so say, the Westphalian systems. But there has been documents coming out. The Washington Post has talked about events, this sort of change of order. The secret documents have talked about this. And of course, we speak in length about propaganda campaigns, information campaigns from the KGB, FSB, all of this back in the day, going back to have influence in Western states, as well as our influence going the other way with similar campaigns. Don't think this goes both ways, but we've spoken about before sanctions and their drawing together of other nations. Due to other things being sanctioned, it draws the South, the global South, closer together in many parts, and people saying we see the rise of the global South. And we're just going to go over this, but where it's going to sit and start is where Speaker Johnson has had a very different sort of outlook on what is happening. Of course, if you're not up to date, then the vote on Saturday will be going onto the floor of the House of Reps for the aid to Taiwan, Israel, and Ukraine. But what I will say on this is there's no guarantees of this money going through. Is it likely? I think so, but it still has to be voted on. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. And ins and outs, nothing is 100% set in stone. Until that money arrives in country, don't count the chickens on this. So, to where other elements draw together of this. And of course, something we've heard about from many leaders around the world and experts, who military commanders, at the end of the day, they're still within the military political leadership of that country. So they still have a line to toe and politics, to work within, about if we don't stop the war here, it will expand. But of course, as we've spoken, these sanctions can pull together as well.
I think they're in coordination on this. I think that Vladimir Putin would continue to march through Europe if he were allowed. I think he might go to the Balkans next. I think he might.
But we were told for years in the beginning that the Russian military won't be able to have any strategic value for another decade, which we'll look at then monetary funds around this as well. Now, this is what I'm talking about. The propaganda has had this massive swing to now that they'll, as you quote him, march to the Balkans.
A showdown with Poland, or one of our NATO allies. To put it bluntly, I would rather send bullets to Ukraine than American boys. My son is going to begin in the Naval Academy this fall. This is a live fire exercise for me, as it is so many American families. This is not a game. It's not a joke. We can't play politics of this. We have to do the right thing. And I'm going to allow an opportunity for every single member of the House to vote their conscience and their will on this. And I think that's the way this institution is supposed to work. And I'm willing to take personal risk for that, because we have to do the right thing.
So, of course, Mike Johnson, he has seemingly had a very different outlook. And someone's saying, what has come and what has had this change? Of course, the Republicans are putting bits in this bill that people have to vote against that are, whatever, and the Democrats are the same. So we will see. And like I said, nothing's there until it is there. But this bill has been held up now for many, many months. One thing that I think the primary concern with this bill is it's shown a big issue in funding, and that funding from here on is not guaranteed. And it's only going to get harder. Think of how many months and how difficult it was to get through this money, this 60 billion. From here on, is going to just get more and more difficult. And I think it has definitely shown this. And even with this 60 billion is a lot of money in terms of you and I and our state, whatever. In terms of war, I don't think that that amount is game changing in this conflict. If it was 250 billion, yeah, we can talk about movements, Crimea, Donbass. I'm not saying this won't have an effect on the front line. I'm not saying that. It's a fucking lot of money. But end of the day, I just don't know if it is enough. Seeing what the first over 100 billion has done compared to then this 60 billion, I don't know where this will actually then fall. But what we're going to go across is these articles. And I've jumped around a little bit. The Russian Foreign Ministry has been drawing up plans to try and weaken its Western adversaries, including the US, to leverage the Ukraine war to forge a global order free from what it sees as American dominance, according to secret Foreign Ministry document. And we've spoken about this. Is this a move away from what a lot of countries see as America ruling the world and have a rise somewhere else? And sanctions exacerbate this. In a classified addendum in the Russian official public foreign policy content in the Russian Federation, the ministry calls for an offensive information campaign and other measures spanning the military, political, economic, trade and informational psychological spheres against a coalition of unfriendly countries led by the US. Of course, the US being the head of NATO and the most powerful country in the world economically and militarily. But we have seen, and you can look at any defecting KGB guys or in that sphere, of, yeah, we had 100% try to push on socio problems to exacerbate and make a separation to try and get it from the inside out. And we know that there's influence in other areas, but we don't think that we don't do the same thing in other areas of the world, aimed at developing practical steps to weaken Russia's opponents. So, of course, that's what they then try to do. And we've talked about this with the war, that we see this as a disarmament of Russia, that we fund Ukraine, and Russia's military is going to collapse and not going to be a threat for decades, like we first spoke about in this. And some people have speculated, is it that, or is it the opposite? Is there a behind the scenes but larger picture where it's actually separating a political division further in countries, which is a huge problem when times of war, and running our stocks down because China hasn't fired a single bullet, and we're pushing them closer together? Is there that? Is what we are trying to do actually happening at the other end of then the spectrum? Anyway, Moscow elites say there's become a hybrid war against the West, hybrid proxy, whatever you want to say. This is what we are seeing in both areas of this. It also are seeking to refashion geopolitics, drawing closer to China, Iran, North Korea in an attempt to shift the current balance of power. Now, look at US with then, of course, Iran, with Israel and Iran's influence there, as well as China with supply into Russia, North Korea with supply into Russia. They're gaining ties. China and Russia have what they call a no-limits friendship. Look at our sanctions against North Korea and Iran. Look at the Houthis getting funded from Iran, who, of course, Iran have a relationship with then Russia, and then the supply up through the Suez Canal that the Houthis are really having a put on. And then that supplies, of course, Western Europe. And then Russia has train lines that can navigate this as well through places like Iran. There may be a larger global, of course there's going to be a layer, people, I think the biggest thing we see, we presume that people we don't like are dumb. Don't think that these leaders are dumb and may not have a larger picture at hand. And this is what we are seeing potentially come in this. Claims that the United States is leading a coalition of unfriendly countries aimed at weakening Russia because Moscow is a threat to the Western global hegemony. The document says the outcome of Russia's war in Ukraine will, to a great degree, determine the outlines of the future world order. Now, I do believe this is correct, and whichever way we see this war go over the next 12 months, 2 years, however, it will have an effect on further global orders. I've heard people talk about it could be the end of things like the EU and NATO and things like that as well. Not that it's going to collapse. People go, well, what does it add for us? So it will just be interesting at this balance of power that the Russians see, or at least the leadership here in these countries see, that there could be a global order shift. And we've seen this then throughout history. Russia hopes the West will realise the lack of any future in its confrontational policy and hegemonic ambitions and will accept the complicated realities of a multipolar world. So you're not just going to have America at the top and everyone fizzling underneath, but there may be other powers challenging that. As we have stated several times on different levels, we can confirm the mood is to decisively combat the aggressive steps taken by the collective West as part of the hybrid war launch against Russia. And this isn't just militarily in hybrid in Ukraine or in Syria or wherever. It's also going to be through social media campaigns, voting campaigns, all of this. Russia's recent veto against extending UN monitoring of sanctions against North Korea over its nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles program is effectively ending 14 years of cooperation. So, like we speak about, there is now real shifting tides, and this is something that diplomats have to be very careful about as far as a world, what is actually happening. And we've had more threats today of World War III, which we'll speak about, but it's about the Middle East, Northeast Asia and African continent, and even Latin America, as Russia can create difficulties for these areas for the US. Now, the academic Vladimir Zarakin called Russia to continue to facilitate the coming power of isolationist right-wing forces in America, enable the destabilization of Latin American countries, and the rise to power of extremist forces on the far left and far right there. Now, from my reading, which is a fair bit on these campaigns back, and it's from people that have defected, it's not about pushing one side or the other. It's about pulling them away from each other and launching them at each other. That there will be, you're trying to have like a civil push against each other rather than you outside coming in. If you can create that internal struggle, that's half the fight then done for you. Well, to continue on here, other points in the proposal, which also provided the post, suggested Moscow stroke conflict between the US and China over Taiwan to bring Russia and China closer together. So if Moscow can have this, of course, it's going to bring Russia and China lean on each other. War brings countries together as well, of course, with sanctions, with oil, with gas, all of this, as well as ideologies. To escalate the situation in the Middle East around Israel, Iran and Syria, distract the US with problems of this region. Very similar to what we could potentially see a huge, well, we are seeing it ramp up, but we don't know where yet that will lead. Saying, I think the US was convinced that the rest of the world, North and South, would support the US in the conflict with Russia, and it turned out that was not true. This demonstrates the single polar world is over, and the US does not want to come to terms with this. So I'd like to just know what you guys think of what is being said here. The Americans consider that insofar they are not directly participating in this war, of course in Ukraine, then any loss is not their loss. This is an absolute misunderstanding that the US, Russia, however, in this war, it is far greater. It's representing maybe a global order shift that could potentially be coming. And I just want to know your speaking on this. And I think this is maybe what Speaker Johnson is having a reference to of, if we see this, what will we see in the Baltic and what will we see here, that we're drawing this together, policy shift, and of course with Taiwan security too. Now, this is from the Ukrainian Prime Minister talking about the frontline situation, talking about the situation and what is happening. Of course, Russia has said that the situation is looking unfavourable to Kyiv. If you look at the maps, it's hard to disagree with this. But speaking to the BBC, he said, we need this money yesterday, not tomorrow, not today. If we want to protect Ukraine, if we will not protect Ukraine, we'll fall. So the global system of security will be destroyed, and all the world will need to find a new system of security. Okay. Or there will be many conflicts, many such kinds of wars, and in the end of the day, it could lead to this third world war. Now, I agree some of this is capitalizing on overall fear of this. No one, including those other powers, I believe, want some sort of hot war. It will be fought through proxy, because otherwise it just ends everything. But we are seeing this shift here. Now, what we do need to speak about is the economic growth of Russia too. That these sanctions, you still see EU puts new sanctions on Russia. It's like, how are there still sanctions to go? Wouldn't have you done this all at one step? Of course, there's a lot of money involved, and Russia's economy has been far more capable than a lot of people predicted, and people in the know that probably should have known this. That from the IMF, Russia to grow faster than all major Western economies. This is from Channel 9, I believe, in Australia, but many other CNN, CNBC are reporting this. The Russian economy will grow quicker than all the world's advanced economies this year, according to the IMF. That Russia will record a economic growth of 3.2% this year, ahead of the US, France, Germany, and Britain. Despite being hit with severe economic sanctions in 2022, steady oil exports and high government spending has bolstered Russia's economy, the IMF has said in a forecast. So heavy government spending definitely has an effect on this, as well as the supply and demand issue with oil will lift oil prices, so temporarily may be up as well. Economics is not as simple as this as long term, but we can see in this forecast here that the Europe area, Germany, the US as well. This is then the forecast, 2.5, 2.7, 1.9. We come down here and see Russia, 3.6, 3.2, 1.8. So you see that dip off with this, but China and India, look at their growth of these countries, and things like BRICS, of course, economically bring these countries closer together. And things like, well, the crude not being refined now in areas and sent to Europe, now crude being exported to India, refined and sold to the West. Well, it creates a link there for Russia as well. Now, let's have a look at these strikes in Dnipro. We spoke about the S-400 down in Crimea. Now we need to speak about this. Now, this has come out in two things. Firstly, I saw this by a fighter bomber. I can't resist, and I just can't. To all the real Ukrainians, one stubborn major and an unknown captain from the fighter structure group, today we finally fucked up this aviator. 2 MiG-29s and an S-300 batteries entered the hang-up. So saying that there was, and saying I have epic proofs, but we can't release it yet. Then had released then this bit of bingo billet, a cassette strike on an open parking lot of aviation aircraft can be used as a teaching aid. Total 2 to 3 MiG-29s, warehouses minus an S-300 with personal belongings in this region. So let's then have a look at footage, and we'll talk about then F-16s in all of this. So we see then 2 MiG-29 sitting here. I have this geolocated to here, so we'll zoom out. There is Dnipro, here is ZAP. So the front line is sitting down around here. So if we have a measure distance, somewhere here, I'm going to be wrong, but somewhere in the vicinity of about 100 kilometers. We'll zoom back on here because it will make more sense in a second. And we see this to my is a Iskander M, I believe, or some sort of airburst, maybe Tornado S, something like this being fired here. So surface to launch, and we see this off the side here. This is just out geolocated to here, so it's just over to the side. Of course, these airbursts will just litter with ball bearings all through these airframes. So 3 looking like 2 to 3, like fighter bomber has confirmed here, and then we see a strike by a more direct strike style weapon on this warehouse, then burning here. So maybe an Iskander, I believe the first one, some sort of tornado like we saw with those choppers getting hit, and then that, and of course then that warehouse on fire is over here. This is where these aircraft were. So a large strike. Very large strike against that, taking out multiple airframes. But one thing with these airframes is these are set to be replaced with the F-16s. Now, Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo, has noted in an interview only yesterday that Ukraine would receive its first F-16s by summer. Of course, this is backed up. The Dutch Defence Minister said in late March that they would be coming in summer, and Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, who have talked about a lot, said they'll be coming mid-summer. So, of course, summer is June to August. So in the next 6 to 10 weeks, we expect to see these planes coming in. Now, many are hailing these planes as there will be a Wunderwaffen, game-changing weapon. If aviation was going to be the game changer in this, Russia would have had more success. They still will have a much more powerful air force, and that air force, realistically, how much has gone down? Well, from what I've read, taking into account, still at sort of somewhere 90% strength, people saying, and we do know that Sukhoi UAC are still producing aircraft and exporting aircraft as well. So we will see a shift in balance, but not a shift in complete power and domination, especially with we're seeing airfields hit by these weapons. Now, what is interesting in this is we're seeing in that footage drones 100 k's behind the line for at least an amount of time, and these air bases should have a lot of air defense over them, and these drones and missiles are coming in basically uninhibited from what it is looking like. So that's going to be a problem as well for when these new airframes come in. But these are being hailed as this will change the war. And I'm just saying, maybe keep a lid on how successful these may actually be or not. But one thing with this is people are saying, well, once these are in, we will see the downing of the Kerch Strait Bridge. So, of course, down here between Crimea and then mainland Russia. Now, I think that the time for this bridge to drop has actually gone from what I am reading and what I am seeing. That I think the bridge will become more of a symbolic targeting, because it's been from the first day of the war, that bridge needs to go to the bridge, and there's been multiple attempts at that bridge. It's been clear, and Ukraine has released even this, that the SBU head, Russia no longer using the Crimean Bridge for weapon supplies after repeated strikes. Now, as well, what we do know is Russia has built a rail network between Rostov down to Sevastopol to the south of Ukraine here that has really negated the use case for this bridge, as well as if this bridge goes down. The whole point of bringing this down this bridge is so Russia will have less supply for the troops in the south. But in the south, if we bring this up, is the most heavily defended area. I don't know why these fortifications won't load, but if we bring up the fortifications, if it would load, is the most heavily defended area. So unless this was to go with then a major push in, I just don't see more than symbolic, and it's going to disrupt things, but I don't see it being yet. In the beginning, it would have been maybe a huge game changer, but now I think the importance of that bridge, it's been too long, and it's become less and less important for it. Now, it's a hard one with that, and we do know that the head of the SBU, Budunov, has said that that bridge will be coming down very soon. So I was just reading my last bits of notes. Now, my notes are done. Let's then have a look at the maps and see what is moving. We have Surak maps, we have Noel reports, we have deep state. So here we have Ukraine, the centre, the capital of Kyiv, red areas occupied since 22, and the purple since 2014, this being, of course, Crimea, where we were speaking about. Now, let's come down into Avdiivka. This is the area that I think most eyes are on. Now, if we bring up the red, there has been a little bit of a shift on this map, just out near Novakalnovia here, out towards Keramik, that this map is showing some advancement out here. And you can see since the last few days, there has been a push, significant push, out in this direction. But what we do see between yesterday and today is a less control that the Russians have had down then this train line running in the north out from Stepovy. As far as the rest here between these days, there's not too much huge difference. There's a shift in grey zone, but not a massive difference except for lack of or less control here and an increase of control out towards Keramik. But other maps aren't exactly showing this either. So if we bring in then the Noel reports map, this is showing this same increase of control by Russians out from Krasnohorivka, the second Krasnohorivka in here, not to get too mixed up, and an increase of control out from this railway here. So the two Ukrainian maps are having a different opinion on exactly what is actually occurring here. So we can see this is this same right turn here, southerly turn. So of course, this map, the MOD is showing that there's further Russian control, but it's skinnier. I'm actually on one map back. So yeah, it's somewhere in between these two. But we do know that Russia has made, one thing we can confirm is that Russia has made ground in there. So we have day 783 map. Now, what we see here, of course, this is, let's line this up properly for you. So this is down the railway here, that there is this expansion of control out to the north. Now these maps are lining up. I actually believe the MOD map here shows more control into this top paddock, as well as more control out towards Ketamik. I don't see any major differences on these maps. Yes, there may be differences in tree lines and roads, but as far as they're moving in that direction, if the Ukrainian map and the Syriac map and other maps are showing the same northerly push in about the same spot, we can confirm that Russia has made territory there. Now, what we are looking at is the change. This is day 785 map on the right, so the more recent. And let's see, because this spy out here is what the MOD map said was the change between these 2 days. So just where we see the Ukrainian map, the Ukrainian blue arrow pushing back. So let's see what then Syriac says. Corrections were made showing Ukrainian army still has presence in the cemetery of Badachi. So Badachi down here, you can still see this. Russian army made new advances near Novokonovi as Ukrainian troops continue to withdraw from other trenches northwards. So this direction by these blue dots. Moreover, clashes between both sides are taking place at the train substation 110 in Oshoteni, considered now under grey zone. So a hell of a lot of fighting here. And again, I'm probably sticking on that too much because the change in the maps is very, very minimal. We're really nitpicking, but we know there was some ground made here. So if we just come down Pervomayeski, Nevelsky, Vodani front road, did get something wrong yesterday. I corrected myself on it in the video, but it was silly. But we see a continuation of control out towards Nalitalovi. So the situation northwest of Don City, 3 days of combat, Russian army managed to enter the first houses of Netalovi. So this is the red dot, the Pervomayeski. Of course, what is being shown differently here is this close up towards Nevelsky. So we see this paddock's right. So this right here is this. So this is said to be under control by Syriac, as well as we see where this waterway runs, that Russia's right down in here closing up this gap, of course, then closing up their front line and having a successful envelope of this area in here, according to at least then the Syriac maps assessment of this. Now we'll just come just to the north a little bit. I don't have anything about Bakhmut today. Of course, this is Bakhmut, but just to the north, the Seversk front, Belhorivka. This is where we did see no reports have some saying there was some Russian movement here. Syriac does talk about a lot of movement here, not a lot as far as ground, but every couple of days there is something. And this is showing just down near the chalk quarry here, a push up just into this. We can see this road cuts back. This is this road, so saying it's right up along here. Of course, this is fairly flat through this area, and this chalk quarry will be high ground, and it will be used for things like observation. I don't think we're going to see troops up on top of it. I don't know, maybe, but it will create massive dead ground behind it. So anything behind it on the eastern side or the western side will have dead ground for troops, for movements, for mortars, for drones, whatever. Now, we'll just come up to the north a little bit. Now, this is Terni. This is somewhere where we thought there was going to be a lot more movement coming, but it has fizzled. It hasn't fizzled. It's still incredibly hard fighting, but the Ukrainian resistance has really been stopping the Russian push here. Russia was pushing very, very hard on this. Now, let's look at Terni. Situation north of Donetsk during the last week. The situation east of Terni has been very fluid, with Russian army advancing towards the town on the northern axis, while Ukrainian army managed to regain positions on the southern axis. So see these tree lines? These are like the 2 tree lines sort of coming out as prongs that Ukraine is pushing back on this one here, as Russia is saying is advancing on the one up here. What we do know is in the war where Russia has the advantage of troop numbers, artillery, FABs, of course, and that comes into aviation as well. But that in closed ground, Ukraine will have more of a chance. Things like, that's why we see the Kremenar Forest basically not changed. Closed ground defensive positions, you can fight with higher difference in numbers and artillery control. It's not as effective in closed ground. Now, where we'll just pick up from, there's no other changes shown on this map at all, but we'll come down into this Robotny or a key front, we used to call it. Now, Ukraine vehemently says that there are no Russian presence in Robotny, although we do know there is a amount of grey zone. What Russia is, of course, trying to do here is they're trying to close up this gap. There are FABs here, there are lots of issues, but Ukraine, with the control of the ground here, still holds a very good position to defend this as well, taking up some of the Surovic and Russian control line. That's what Russia's trying to get back, that control line, negate any gain that Ukraine made in this front last year, So you can see this is the gain that Ukraine made in their much-awaited counteroffensive last year. If they can close that up, regain it, then sort of back to, well, not even back to square zero, you're actually back to minus squares, because it'll be remined, redug, and will be relearned how to fight through that position better. Of course, the whole point of this southerly push down the Kerch Bridge is then you can't supply as well into the south. That is the overarching sort of theory here. But let's have a look then at the Noel report's map of this. Now, these maps are not the easiest, but we have another point. We've got here, so it's saying that Russia has made some ground. You can see where this tree line is, and of course these are defensive works in these black. So it's showing no different to what this map is showing, but has said that Russia has made some advancement here. But this map, much like then the Syriac, much like then the Deep State, shows that there's still the Syrian line that is under Ukrainian control, where the Syriac will say that none of it is under Ukrainian control here. So again, this area here is the area that I'm least sure about of what is actually happening, because all three maps on day to day may tell a very different story. Now, legends, that will be the end of video today. Now, if you'd like to support me, there's links down below, but otherwise, look after yourselves. Have a great day. Have a great, what day is it? Have a great weekend. And I'll speak to you very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.